Okay guys, so today I'm just going to take you through creating this type of layout where we've got alternating order of columns on each row using a flex row. This is not a grid. I love CSS grid and I use it all the time, but in this particular instance, flex rows actually make more sense. And the main reason being is because on the alternating row, to change the order, we just need to set one property, which is the flex direction, and it reorders the columns that we've got here. Whereas with grid, you've got to do placements along the lines for your row and your column. It's not as easy to do as this. It's still doable, but this is a hell of a lot easier. I'm just going to show you a utility class that I use a lot that can do this for you. The second thing I'm going to show you is the image that I've got in the background of this row here on the right of the top column is an actual image element, which can be a figure or a picture as well, and it behaves like a CSS background set to cover. So we have all the advantages of an image with the lazy loading, the source sets, the alt tag, but it looks and behaves like a CSS background. And I use that all the time rather than CSS backgrounds. For the benefits, I'm going to show you how that bit works as well. Now, I'm not going to use any framework for this. So I'm not going to use ACSS or Core Framework or even my own framework that I use. I'm just going to use raw values so you can see where those go and that it's not specific to a framework. In a production environment, I would not encourage putting in raw values. I'd rather use variables, particularly from a framework, to keep everything consistent. But for demo purposes, I will just use raw values, not framework variables. Now, I'm also going to use Advanced Thema, which is a brilliant tool for productivity. It is purely for productivity. It is not adding any variables or CSS to use in the design. Now, I've got to say, this is my third attempt at making this video. And the reason for that is that I kept running into some bugs with one of the Advanced Thema, or AT, I'll call it from here on, with the supercharged CSS feature. It just kept getting in the way and things not working properly. A couple of things Maxine needs to fix. No offense, Maxine, love Advanced Theme or AT, but this bit does need a little bit of work. And I'm currently sitting at version 1.2.4.2, so I'm on the current version as recording this video. All right, so I'll get over to the build and we'll look at how this is laid out, and then we'll look at the alternating columns. Actually, what we'll do first is we'll look at the image because that's part of one row. So how do we do this image, and then how do we make these columns alternate on each row? All right, so heading over to the builder, and I've got all my code there. I'm going to start by getting rid of everything. And I'm then going to go into my sections here, and I'm going to just get rid of all the classes I created just by deleting them out of bricks. So we're starting from fudging this as we go and working it out. I think I had one called alternating in there as well. I did alternating reverse, row reverse. So we're starting from absolute scratch where we have nothing but bricks defaults with a section and a container. So inside that container, I'm going to add a block, and I'm going to call this my service row. And I'm going to create a BEM block at the top. This is the only BEM class I need to manually create, and I'm going to show you why. So a service row there as a BEM row. Now, if we look at our design here in our row, we've got two columns. In the left column, we've got an accent heading, a actual heading, some copy, and a button. So let's have a look at that. So I'm going to add a block. Inside that block, I'm going to add, I'll put my heading first. For readability, I'd rather have the heading before the accent. Because heading's an actual heading, the accent's just a span or a P or whatever it is. Okay, so I'm going to put the heading there. I'm going to put a basic text, which will be my accent. Maybe I'll put some copy, and I'll put a button. And for the accent, I'm just going to say accent. Okay, and that is our first row, the elements that we need. Now the second row, I've got a image, a heading, and some basic text here. So I'm going to create another block under my service row. And this is the AT stuff here. So if you don't have Advanced Theme installed, you won't have these. You have to go through the plus, put them in there, whatever framework you use that adds that for you. So in the second row, we've got, what do we say? We have a heading and we have a basic text, I think. They are. Now, by default, Bricks makes our headings H3s, which is fine in this case, because I would imagine this would come under a section with a heading up here, which is probably going to be an H2. But just bear in mind, whatever your heading above that is, these ones should be the next level below that. All right, so we've got some structure there. Now, first thing I'm going to do is on my section, and I don't normally edit it at ID level. In fact, AT allows us to block that. So I've got it blocked. I'm going to just change the background color here because this is only for demo purposes. I don't need a class for this. Okay, so I'm just going to set the background to this dark gray. So we've got something we can work with in here. All right, now naming. And I'm going to show you a really cool tool in AT, but it really depends on how well you name these elements in the structure panel. I'll show you why. I'm going to call this one col1. And I'm going to call that one col2. And I'm going to call this my main heading. And I'm going to call this my accent heading. And we'll call this our left col1 copy. And the CTA button, because the button should be the same. Pretty much, if this doesn't matter which column I've got that in the button, probably should be the same anyway. And then on col2, I'm going to call this my col2 heading, or we'll call this the subheading. No, we'll call it the col2 heading. Col2 heading, and we'll call this col2 copy. All right, so we've got names on all of these elements here in the structure panel. Here's the cool part. Now we go back to our service row. This is an AT feature, and we've got a class on this called service-row. So I'm going to right click on my service row in the element panel, class converter. We only want to affect the children. We've got a service row. Two underscores. So service row with two underscores will be our class prefix that's going to create. This is the BEM creator in AT. All we have to do is that name as a prefix. We only want to do the children. I haven't put anything on the ID levels of these, so I'm not going to worry about any of that. Create classes. There we go. We've now got, I've actually got some residual styling there. So I'm just going to save and reload. So we get rid of that styling there. So Bricks is remembering some residual styling here. By the way, I'm actually running this on local by Flywheel. And strangely, I find that the reloading of pages is actually slower on here than it is on my live hosting. So anyway, so each time I realize it's going to take a little bit of time. So there you go. My residual classes that I deleted there are now gone. So what I need to do now is on my service row, so I can see that I've got a BEM block, which I created called service row. We need to set this to be a row. And there we go. We can see that change up there. Okay, now for the moment, that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to show you a problem that we need to resolve. So we go to column 1, and let's select, make sure we select the class. In AT, there's a feature to lock ID styling, so you have to unlock it. This stops you from accidentally styling at the ID level, but if you select the class, then you can style, which is a really cool way of doing it, because then sometimes you forget in Bricks that you haven't selected the class and you start styling the wrong thing. Anyway, so that's a side note. So we're on our col1 and our style. We're going to set a background on that, and we'll make it this background, and we'll now layout. Let's just do that at 2 rem. So we get 2 rem, padding around all sides. Again, I would actually probably use a framework variable here rather than raw values, so that it's consistent across the entire site, but I'm just using raw values again, just to highlight that. Okay, and we're going to go to the col2 now, and we're going to style that, and same padding, 2 rem, oops. And I've got to lock all sides, so 2 rem all the way around, and give that a background of a different kind of blue. So you can see here the problem with these col1 and col2, they're not the same height. With a grid, if you have a 2-column grid, these will be the same height by default because grids are a 2-dimensional structure. Flex is a 1-dimensional structure, and you need to set properties to make it behave the way you want it to behave. So let's go back to our service row, and we've still got that selected up there. And what we want to do is we've got an option here for align cross axis. We want to set that to stretch, and that fixes the problem by making these two sub-elements, so column 1 and column 2, stretch to fit the cross axis. Okay, so we're on a row, so that's our axis is horizontal, our cross axis is vertical. Okay, so that's the row partially done. We're now actually going to put some spacing in between these because I'm going to want this to look like a grid when we have this drop down to the next line as well. So I'm going to put some row gap in there and make it the same as our padding. So I'm going to make the 2 rem. Oops, wrong one. Column gap. 2 rem column gap. Now we've got the same gap there as we've got the padding around the edges. And that's pretty much our structure started for our column. I'll work on the other parts. Oops, I've lost my reference now because I had it linked. Okay, don't worry about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the column on the left 60% of the width, and the column on the right 40% of the width. You can leave it as 50-50. I'm going to show you what you do for this though. So what you would think you'd do is go to column 1, go to your style, and you go to layout and set that width to 60%. Okay. That doesn't work. I wouldn't mind column 1. There we go. So yes, I've set it to 60%. And you would think that 60% would mean that this one would now be bigger than that one, and the right one would be 40%. But the way Flex works is it takes the entire width that you've defined and shrinks it to fit within that space. So by default, the blocks in Flex, blocks in Bricks Builder are 100%. So the total we have in here is 160% plus 2 REM, this gap in the middle. So the actual size that we're working with is 160%, or maybe 162%, I don't know, because of the 2 REM. So what that's doing now is saying that our left one is 60% of that. So it's really deceiving. You think you've done the right thing here, but it doesn't work unless you set the other side. Like we go to the other side here and set that to 40. Then it works. So you've got to set both sides for what you think should happen to actually happen. There's a better way to do this, and that is using a CSS calculation. So we're going to come back to our service row, and on our CSS, we're going to create a couple of rules. Just on root, we're going to create a CSS variable called col1. We're going to set that to 60%. We're going to do col2 width is calc of 100% minus this col1 width. So I'm going to grab that so we don't have any typos here. So it'd be 100% minus bar. So what we're saying here, if col1 width is 60%, we want col2 to be 100% minus col1. Now we grab that variable and we go to our col1, making sure it's selected, and in the layout we set the width to be a variable of col1 width. On col2 we set that to be a variable of col2 width, and then we've got our 60-40. Now if we want to change it, instead of having to go to both of these, we just go back to our service row, and let's say we want that to be a bit more, maybe 65%. And here's one of the first things in AT. See, I've just changed that to 65, but nothing changed here. If I press the space bar, now it changed. There's just a little rendering issue that's come up in the later versions of AT for this supercharged CSS. So there's a bunch of really cool features in here. But one of the things is that I keep getting trapped where I'll make a change here and nothing changes. And what I found is that if you make a change and nothing changes, and then you browse away from this tab and you come back to it, the value is not the same as what you'd expect it to be. It's actually got the previous value in there. So what you need to do is make sure that every time you make a change here, at least press the enter key or the space bar or something and make sure your display updated. So just a little bug, but it can be a little bit frustrating when you're not aware of it. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Now, the first problem we see with this, if we go to our tablet breakpoint, what do they call it, portrait breakpoint, it's fine. Mobile landscape, we've got a problem. And the reason for that, the default in bricks is that when you get to this mobile landscape, it turns that into a column and wraps this content around, but we've told the widths to be smaller than 100%. So we need to make sure that we're aware of that. And we'll talk about, and here's another issue with AT that I'll point out. So I've just changed from this breakpoint to that breakpoint, and my CSS, it just came back. Try it again. CSS is gone. See, I can't see it now, it's come back. But what I found is sometimes it disappears altogether. You just have to collapse and open that. And if that doesn't work, then you have to save and refresh. So that's just another little bug that's happening in AT that Maxi might want to look at. All right, so what we need to do is create a media query for the min width, max width, sorry. No, min width of 768 pixels. And we want to move that to be in here. I'm going to set these to 100%. There's other ways of doing this. You can use fallback variables as well. I think this is the cleanest way that I think to do this. So what that's doing is it's setting both col1 and col2 width to 100%. If the viewport is wider, wider than 767, so 768 or up, then we're going to set our column widths. Now you have to do this in a media query because bricks, these mobile breakpoints are not mobile first, they are the other way around. So what happens if you set a CSS at this tablet portrait, it's from that point downwards. If you set it from the tablet, the mobile landscape, it's from that point downwards. What we want is from this breakpoint, so the 768 and upwards, we want this to apply. So we have to use a media query for that. All right, now we'll find that that works. So if I go to my mobile tablet breakpoint, the columns go to 100%. If I go to the mobile portrait, we've got our 65-35. Desktop, we got our 65-35. Mobile, 100%. Okay, so that's all we need to do that, and that is done. Now, also looking at these here, we probably want to go back to our columns, and in our columns, we want to add some row gap to space these out. Now, I'm going to just make that say 1.5 rem and do the same on the second column. Okay. That work, it did. These two are, that's just one block there. All right, now coming back to our column 1. Normally when you got your accent heading and your heading, you group them together so you don't have the same spacing. So we're going to add a block in here. We'll call that, I probably should have done this in the first place, but I missed it. We'll call this col1 header. And what we'll do is we'll grab the class name from the previous one. And we'll manually just create this BEM name here. Whoops, messed that up. BEM name col1 header. Okay, and what I'm going to do is stick my heading and my accent inside there. So I've got my col1 header now. I've got my main heading there, and my accent heading is there underneath it. So that just groups them together so that 15 or 1.5 rem doesn't apply to those two. And then we can set how we want. And the other thing we want is we want our heading, actual heading before our accent, but quite often we'll see our accent appear before the heading. So we go to accent here, go to styles and layout, and we set our order to -1. Okay. Now semantically, we have our heading before our accent heading, but visually our accent heading appears before the heading. So that's it done. Now we need to move on to the image. So that is the row all set out as a flex row with 2 columns with some content in it, properly spaced. All right, let's move on to the image that we're going to stick in the second column. So what I missed there, I missed the image. So I'm going to put the image in there. They can go anywhere in there, but I'm going to now call that my feature image. And if I thought this out to start with, I would have actually named this beforehand. But now I need to manually create that BEM. So I'm just going to call that feature. Whoops. So I've got a service row feature image. On my service row feature image, so we can style that differently if we want to. All right, I'm going to select an image, and we'll use that same laptop I used in my demo. There it is there. Now what we wanted to have is have this as a background in this entire block here. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of utility classes. And the reason I use a utility class is because that isn't just something we're going to do in this block. I use this a lot. I use it whenever I want a CSS background. I'll use the same utility class set. Now, the first thing we want to do is we want to make the parent contain, or the box that we want this image to fill. We need to set the position on that to relative. Then we need to set the position on the image to absolute and position it within that relative box. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my column 2. I'm going to create a utility class called image as BG. I'm going to give it a element name as wrapper. Okay, so image is BG wrapper. All I'm going to do on that is set my CSS here, which is already there. Take that out for now. Sorry, I forgot to create, delete this before. So images BG wrapper is just at the moment setting the position to relative. Okay, and then on the, so we got there. Images BG wrapper. I've got some other stuff on here from playing around. Let me have a look at that. Get rid of all that. So all we want is CSS position relative. There's a problem with playing with these demo sites. Sometimes you have some residual stuff you forgot about. But we're back to just having just on that images BG wrapper, just this CSS here, and that's it. So we're going to just copy that name to the first part of that BEM name and go to our feature image. And we're going to create another BEM element here, and we're going to call that image. So we've got our image as BG with the element image. Okay. Now, again, that's already got some classes on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just delete all this so that we can start from a point of what we need to do. Anything else set on here? No, I haven't. Okay. So first of all, we're going to target root, and we're going to set the position to absolute. Okay. Now what that does is it sticks the top left to the padding box, inside the padding box of the first element above it that is set to relative. So we don't want that. We want to actually put it to the actual left and top of that box, not inside the padding box. So we're going to put the top 0, and we're going to put the left of 0. Okay, now we've got a sizing problem. It's not the width and height of the box. We're going to set the width to 100% and the height 100%. Okay. What's going on there? Why isn't that working? So some weird thing. Okay. Here we go. I must have spelled it incorrectly. So now what we have is a squashed laptop. It's not filling the space, it's squashing it to fill in the space because the width and height, the aspect ratio is different to the actual image. So now we need to set the object fit to cover. Okay, and now it's not squashed anymore. It actually fits like a CSS background set to cover. Okay, sorry. There we go. Now I've done it correctly. All right, so that looks correct there. I'm going to show you a problem with doing this that we need to resolve. When we go back to our content on the image, by default, when we add it, it's an image element. We've got some options here. We can change it to a figure or a picture tag. So if I change that to a figure, we've got a squashed laptop again. If we change it to a picture, we've still got a squashed laptop. And the reason for that is that when you change the image to a figure, it wraps the image inside a figure tag, and then it's got the image element inside of the figure tag. But what we're doing with our styling here is we're only targeting the parent tag. So when it's set to a figure, we're only targeting the figure tag. So what we need to do is under there, we need to go to root, image. So we'll target the image inside there. And we want to set that to cover as well. Okay, so that changed there. Now if we go back to the HTML tag, so that's fine, that's cover. Change it to a figure, it's still set to cover. Change it to a picture, it's still set to cover, so it still works properly. All right, but we can see a problem here where now that we've positioned this absolutely, we can't see our heading or our copy anymore because they are behind this image. So we need to tell the z-index on that image to be behind it. So I'm going to set that z-index to -5. And you see another problem here. The image completely disappears. Now the reason the image completely disappears is because all of these elements have an implied stacking order if you don't add a z-index. So when we set any z-index, it is taken as a absolute z-index. So what's happening here is when we set a -5 index on this feature image, it's disappearing behind everything above it that doesn't have a z-index that's lower than that. So a section up the top here is our start. We've got a background on that section. This image is disappearing behind that section background. And to fix that, what we have to do is tell it that this level up here, that we want a new stacking order. We want a new z-index stacking order. So everything underneath that, the z-index is relevant to that or relative to that point there. So to do that, we go back to our images BG wrapper. And in our CSS, we need to set the isolation to isolate. Now this is a crazy word they use in CSS for this, but what that means is from this point, make a new z-index stacking order, and every z-index below that is relevant to that point. So that's all that does, and it's a simple thing to do. Crazy word, doesn't really make a lot of sense. All right, now we've got a basic box with an image element acting as a CSS background. Now we need to do a little bit of styling on that. So I'll just say go on our column 2 for now. And we'll just set our typography default to be a light color. So we have a light color there. And we're going to set a overlay for our overlay and pick a color. And this could be a gradient or whatever you like, and give that some transparency. There we go. We're kind of where we were before with our demo, where we've got a image as a background, we've got a overlay, and we've got our font set to white. So I'm just going to save that and then have a quick look at the front end. And there it is there. All right, now I'm going to look at this column here and have a look at what we've actually got. So what we end up with is for our service row column 2, here's our figure, which is our image. And the figure has an image inside of it, which has got all of these lovely source set things. So it's going to display a different size image or download a different size image at different viewport widths, which is great for SEO. We can put an alt tag on that if we want to give it a description, and we can decide whether it eager or lazy loads. So way more effective than using a CSS background, and it works beautifully. So that's what we just did there. And then on the service row 2 on the before, we've got our overlay that we created from the bricks UI, and because we've made this figure a z-index of -5 with that images background overlay, this element here is sitting on top of that, which is why we can still see the overlay. So that's the basics of what we've just done. All right, now that's the first part done. We've got our BEM structure created, we've got our row structure created, we've got our image as a background, and we've got our content ready to go. Now here's where we're going to look at the actual alternating rows and show you how this is a lot easier than doing this with grid. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a block up the top here. I'm going to call this my UL. I'm going to put the word it traps me every time when you delete everything on a structure name. It puts the actual element name back in there as you type. So frustrating. But right, so UI alternating, and we're going to make that a UI, UL, I should say. And we're going to add a class to that, which I'm going to call alternating row reverse. So this is our second utility class, which is something that is really cool to use. Alternating row reverse, we're going to call that. And we're going to put our service row under that, and we're going to make that a li as well. So now we have a UL and an li. Okay, I'm going to show you a problem. You see when I go to the UL at the top here, I've got some extra padding on the side here, and that's because of the browser defaults, which we need to get rid of. We're not in a framework. The framework will generally deal with that with you, but because we're not using a framework, I'm going to show you what you actually have to do to fix that. But I'm just going to create this first. Okay, so now we've got a UL up here, which is our top level block. We've got a service row here, which is our an li, and we're going to just duplicate that service row, and we see they're both around the same way. So go back to our alternating, alternating. I'm not going to create a BEM class for this because this is just a demo, and what I'm going to do is just on my style for that, I'm going to set my row gap to 2 rem. So that's the same as the spacing between our elements. And what we have here is just a standard UL with 2 service rows that look exactly the same. We want every second one of these to flip around though. So what we want to do is target this level here and every even child. So that's an odd child, even child. If we added a third one, that'll be a odd child. We add another one, that'll be an even child. Okay, so we're going to target those. So I'm coming back to my alternating here, and what we're going to look at here is creating a CSS rule. So the roots, we're going to, I'm just going to do this basically first, and then I'll tidy it up. Root. So the root is this block here. We want to look at the elements under that, and then every second one of those. So I'm going to go root, immediately followed by any element that is the nth child of even is our basic CSS rule that we want. And then we're going to set the flex direction to row reverse, which is why I called this alternating row reverse. Okay, and there we go. We've got alternating row reverse, and that's all we need is this one rule, so that every one of these that we add will reverse the order of the flex row. So I'm going to save that and have a look in the front end, and we see we have a problem. It displays in the back end, but not in the front end. And what I discovered is to do with specificity. There's a weird thing happening here in Chrome. If I look at this even li here, so I've got an odd li, the first one, and I've got even one. You can see our rule is applying, and that rule there, that's the rule there. But for whatever reason, Chrome is determining that to be more specific. Now, I think it may be because we've got this, this joining of the two classes there. Whereas if this was a bricks block with that, it'll probably do the same. But we don't know where we're going to use this. We don't know if it's going to be on a block or what it's going to be on. So we need to make this rule more specific than that rule. And what I found is if you just go to, say, the body class up here, you find something that's going to be on every bricks page. In this case, we can say BRX, BRX body. I'd say that's on every page. So I'm going to copy that rule, that class name, come back to my rule, and I'm going to prefix this with the class name of BRX body before the root, and then try that. And there we go. It works because the rule is more specific. So let's go back to that. Let's have our rule. Here's our second rule there. And now that rule is overriding this rule because we've made it more specific with that extra path name there. Right, so that's avoid using important. I could have just stuck the important keyword on there, but it is a nightmare of a thing to do because you start messing with CSS specificity rules and it becomes a bit of a difficult one to troubleshoot at times. So if your rule needs to be more specific, make it more specific. And there it is. That is our layout. And you can tell here, if I just go to the last one and duplicate that element, we've got our row around this way, our columns around this way. If I duplicate it again, then our columns around the other way. And the only thing that's making that happen is that rule there. Isn't that cool? And that's so much easier than trying to work out, which column number to start from and which column number to end at. And the next row, go, okay, I want that to start at this column and end at that column. And this is a way easier to do it. Now, in Grid, there is a direction you can set of RTL, which does achieve reversing the order of your columns in your grid. But the problem with it is that it cascades down. So if you set this row here to be RTL, all of the child elements are then also RTL. So you have to go to the child elements and tell them they're now actually LTR. So it's a bad way of doing it. So it works, but it's not a good way of doing it. I think this is a really simple way to do it in Flex. So in this tutorial, the only thing that added some complexity was this image in the background. The rest of it was really simple Flex for these rows, and then a simple rule as a utility to reverse every even child. Okay. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about, which again, if you've got a framework to deal with this, is we have a problem here with some extra padding, which is our browser default. And if we look in the browser, we can see it there. So on that UL, we've got some margin and some padding. What I would typically do is grab this bricks block. And again, I would do this in external style sheet. So whether it's a code manager or your child theme, whatever. But for now, I'm just going to put it, say, on the section here. And again, I would not normally do this, so don't follow this as the way to do things. And in here, I'm just going to put a ul dot bricks block, and we're going to set the margin to 0, padding to 0, and list style type to 0, and we've solved the problem. However, sometimes you won't use a block for your UL. Sometimes you might use a container. So I'm going to copy that container class there. And I'm going to put in a comma, ul.bricks container. So what that's saying is whether I turn a container or a UL into a block into a UL, this rule here is going to get rid of all of the margin and padding and set the style type to 0. So that what we end up with is a semantic list. So in here we actually have, this could be a list of services, prices, whatever. We end up with a properly formatted list with a UL and a bunch of allies underneath it. All right, so that was a lot to cover, a lot more than I thought I was going to cover. So hopefully it all makes sense. If it doesn't, ask me some questions or give me some feedback and let me know what you want explained more. Okay, thank you. And if you like this sort of thing, hit the subscribe, hit the like. Thank you.